My friends all saw him naked and said it was tiny. When I told him this, he got mad and then, hello Reddit. Long-time lurker here, but this time I'm posting because I'm really lost and I don't know what else to do. I'm using a throwaway account because I don't want this tied to my main. My friends and family follow me on there, and I'd rather keep this mess private. So here I am, pouring my heart out to strangers on the internet, hoping to find some guidance. I'm not naive. I know Reddit is known for flaming people and being pretty brutal, but I've also seen how it can sometimes provide genuinely helpful advice. I expect to get flamed for this, honestly. I probably deserve it. But if there's anyone out there who can offer constructive feedback, I'd appreciate it. I really don't know where else to turn, and I can't bring myself to talk to my friends about this. My name is Ashley, I'm 29, and my husband Max is also 29. We've been married for about 2 years, but we've known each other forever. It's that classic childhood sweethearts thing. We grew up together, have been in each other's lives since forever, and we're each other's first for everything. Our lives have basically revolved around one another for as long as I can remember. Max is incredible. I'm not just saying that because I feel guilty, though I'll get to that in a minute. He's supportive, caring, and honestly the most selfless person I've ever known. He always puts my needs above his own and goes out of his way to make sure I'm happy. He's been the perfect partner in so many ways, the kind of person you'd look at and say, wow, that's what a great relationship looks like. And yet, I still managed to screw it all up. Big time. And I'm going to admit right now that this isn't an easy post to write because I know I'm the one who messed up. And not just in a little oops way. I did something awful. Something I don't know if I'll ever be able to take back. I hurt Max in a way I never thought I could. And now I'm left trying to figure out if there's any way to fix it. Let me explain. In the beginning, I used to think it was amazing how Max was so caring, so good to me, how he always put my needs above his own, how he always chose me first no matter what. It was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He never complained, never asked for anything in return, and I thought, wow, I'm so lucky. I wanted to be a stay-at-home wife, and I told him that was what I needed to be happy. Max agreed without hesitation. He took on the full responsibility of supporting us financially, no questions asked. I wanted to get married, even though he wasn't big on the idea of marriage, but again, he agreed, because it was what I wanted. And when it came to starting a family, he had always dreamed of having kids early, but I wasn't ready. I told him I wanted to wait until we were in our 30s. Again, he didn't fight it. He agreed. There were countless other incidents like that. He has always been the one to bend, to compromise, to make sure I got what I wanted, even when it meant putting his own desires on the back burner. In the beginning, I thought it was sweet. I found it so endearing that he would do anything for me, that I had someone who cared so deeply about making me happy. It felt like something out of a storybook, where the prince does everything for the princess, no matter what. But then, things started to change. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, it began to grate on me. What I used to find endearing started to feel suffocating. I guess, in a way, it started to feel like Max didn't have a backbone, that he would just do whatever I said without ever standing up for himself or pushing back. And that was when I started making new friends. Friends who were a little more worldly, I guess. They were outgoing, confident, and used to being with guys who challenged them, who weren't afraid to assert themselves. When I started spending more time with these new friends, I began to see Max through their eyes. They would tease me about the fact that he was the only man I'd ever been with. They'd make offhand comments about how he always let me have my way, how it must be so boring to be with someone who never challenged me, who wasn't more exciting. I started to feel embarrassed about him. There was a part of me that agreed with them, even though I hated to admit it, but that part of me started to grow, and eventually it started to show in how I treated him. I became condescending. I started talking down to him, making little remarks that I thought were just playful at first. I'd joke about how he always did what I said, how he was so predictable. I would laugh about it with my friends, and at some point, I think I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal, that it was just harmless banter. But deep down, I knew I was changing. I knew I was starting to resent him for something that used to make me love him even more. I was caught up in this new version of myself, this version that cared more about what other people thought than about what I actually felt. And somewhere along the way, I let that version take over. I was just so caught up in this new version of myself that I barely even cared about what Max thought or said. My shift in attitude was so massive, I'm pretty sure it must have shocked him. I went from seeing Max as this loving, supportive partner to viewing him as an obstacle in my way. I started to act like his feelings and opinions didn't matter at all. I don't know exactly when it happened, but the condescension became second nature. For instance, when it came to social events, I didn't care what Max wanted. There were so many times when he would ask me to skip a party, especially when he didn't feel comfortable with the crowd or had a bad gut feeling about it. I knew he preferred that I stayed home and spent time with him, but I ignored that completely. I would argue, saying, "You're not my dad, Max. I don't need permission to go out." I framed him as being controlling just because he was uncomfortable. In my mind, he was trying to hold me back, to keep me from enjoying life and making friends. I even started convincing myself that the only reason I ended up with Max was because he had somehow manipulated me into thinking he was the only one for me. My friends, God, they didn't help at all. They fed this narrative, telling me that it was weird that Max had been my only serious relationship, that I hadn't experienced anything else. It started getting to my head. I genuinely started believing that maybe Max had somehow trapped me all my life. I told myself that I was just with him out of convenience, not because I wanted to be. That mindset poisoned the way I treated him. I became so condescending. I would publicly mock his decisions, making jokes about how naive or simple-minded he was in front of our friends. It was like I felt the need to put him down so that I could lift myself up. I thought I was the one calling the shots in our marriage, and I made sure he knew that. His opinions? I didn't care. Max could suggest something, anything really, and I would shut it down without a second thought, acting like I was the only one capable of making decisions for both of us. One time, we were shopping for furniture, and he suggested a practical, affordable couch. I just rolled my eyes and said, "Max, your taste is so boring. I'll handle this. Clearly you have no idea what looks good." It wasn't just the couch. This attitude spilled into every aspect of our lives. Even when it came to our finances, Max was the one carrying the financial load, yet I never took his concerns seriously. If I wanted something, I would just go for it. Max would try to tell me that we couldn't afford certain things, like a vacation or redecorating the house, but I would just dismiss him, telling him he was being paranoid and that we could just take out loans if needed. I never bothered to think about the strain this was putting on him, or on our future. I wasn't just undermining his opinions, I was actively downplaying his feelings. Our anniversaries, or even special occasions, I missed them. I was too busy doing what I wanted. Max tried to plan something special for us one year, and when I finally showed up late, I wasn't even grateful. I acted disappointed and told him it was too basic, like it wasn't enough. He looked crushed, but I didn't care at the time. I brushed it off as him being overly sensitive, telling him he was overreacting. It was like I had become blind to the fact that this was the man who had always gone out of his way to make me happy, and I was treating him like he was a nuisance. And then there was the way I would brag to my friends. I don't even know why I did it, but I would talk about how much control I had over Max. My friends would comment on how different we were and would ask why I was still with him, why I hadn't left him for someone more exciting or adventurous. Instead of defending Max, I would just shrug and say, because I have control over him, he wouldn't dare tell me what to do. It was like I was proud of the fact that I could do whatever I wanted, and Max would never stand up to me. I said these things even in front of him, not caring how hurtful it was or how humiliated he must have felt. I don't know what got into me. I became someone I didn't even recognize. The worst part is, Max didn't deserve any of it. He never once tried to control me. He was just trying to look out for me, trying to make sure we were on solid ground. And I took advantage of his love and loyalty and treated him like his thoughts, feelings, and contributions didn't matter. I tried so hard to fit in with this new crowd of people, and now looking back, I can't even understand why. I don't know what it was that drew me to them. Maybe it was because they were bold, outspoken, and always seemed so carefree. They had this confidence that I felt I lacked, and I guess I thought if I became like them, I'd finally feel that way too. But to do that, I had to prove myself. And somehow, that led to me realizing the easiest way to impress them was by embarrassing Max. These friends would constantly label themselves as feminists, preaching about independence and how they didn't need men, when in reality, most of them were just using this rhetoric as an excuse to treat people however they wanted. They weren't about empowerment, they were about self-indulgence. Some of them were openly cheating on their partners or jumping from one fling to another, but they'd paint it as a form of rebellion against societal norms. I was too blind to see it for what it really was. At that time, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be seen as strong and in control, like they were, and I thought the way to do that was by showing that I could dominate Max. It started small, but it quickly spiraled out of control. I began to treat Max like he was my personal servant in front of them. I would joke around saying, "Oh, Max is just my assistant. He does whatever I tell him." It was like a performance, something I put on to show how much control I had. I thought it made me look powerful in their eyes. It became a routine. Anytime Max was with us, I would start ordering him around, belittling him, making him the punchline of every joke. My friends laughed, and I basked in their approval. I thought I was winning, but all I was doing was losing respect for the one person who had always been in my corner. I didn't stop there either. I started making fun of Max's appearance, both in front of them and when we were alone. I mocked his clothes, his hair, his weight, anything I could find to tear him down. It didn't matter if it was true or not. The point was to make him feel small and make myself look bigger in comparison. I took everything about Max for granted. His feelings, his desires, his opinions, they all became insignificant to me. I acted like nothing he said or did mattered, and in doing so, I became increasingly dismissive, cruel, and hurtful. And then my friends started talking about cheating. They made it sound like it was no big deal, like it was empowering. Women aren't meant to be monogamous, they'd say. It's just society forcing us into these relationships. I didn't buy into it at first. The idea seemed absurd to me. I'd been with Max my entire life, and we had always been faithful to each other. But the more they talked about it, the more they tried to push me toward it. They even started setting me up with random guys at parties, trying to get me to hook up with someone else. At first, I resisted. I wasn't interested, but over time, their words started getting to me. I started questioning everything. Was I really happy with Max? Was it normal that I'd only ever been with him? Maybe they were right. Maybe I was missing out on something. And soon enough, I became open to the idea of cheating. I convinced myself that it wouldn't be such a big deal. I started doing things that I knew would hurt Max. I'd go to parties and dance with other guys, grinding on them, letting them touch me. I'd even make out with some of them, knowing full well it was crossing a line, but I never went all the way. That was my boundary, the one I convinced myself I wouldn't cross. At least, not yet. But the truth was, I wanted to. I wanted to cross that line. I wanted to experience what my friends kept talking about. I felt like I was trapped in this monogamous relationship, and that maybe if I opened things up, I'd finally feel the freedom I was craving. So, I decided to bring it up to Max. I knew it wasn't something Max would ever agree to. He was monogamous to his core. It was one of the things I used to admire about him. But I was so far gone at that point, so wrapped up in my own delusions, that I thought I could manipulate him into it. Max had always listened to me, always put my needs above his own. So I thought I could strong-arm him into opening up our marriage. I figured if I pushed hard enough, he'd cave like he always did. I'd guilt-trip him, make him feel like he was being selfish if he said no. Maybe even trick him into thinking it was his idea. It was such a twisted plan, but in my mind, I justified it. I told myself that this was something I deserved, that I had the right to explore other options. Max would just have to deal with it. I didn't see how wrong it all was until it was too late. My so-called friends, if I can even call them that anymore, made me do things that I'm disgusted by. Looking back, I realize how toxic they were, but at the time I was so desperate to fit in, to be a part of their group, that I let them lead me into doing something horrible. Now, I regret it more than anything. It all started when we were sitting around talking about relationships, and of course sex came up. They were obsessing over how the size of a man really matters, and it didn't take long before they turned their attention to me, asking what size Max was. I tried to brush it off, telling them that he was above average, thinking that would shut down the conversation. But it didn't. They wouldn't let it go. They kept pushing, asking more questions, teasing me, and then one of them suggested the most ridiculous thing they wanted to see for themselves. I was shocked. Obviously, who wouldn't be? I told them no, of course. I said I wasn't going to do that, but they didn't let it drop. For days they kept pushing, making jokes about it, saying things like, "Come on, we're all girls here, it's no big deal." And for some reason, I started to believe it. Maybe I thought if I gave in, they'd finally stop. Maybe I thought it would earn me more of their approval. I don't know, but eventually I caved. I feel sick just thinking about it now, but at the time, I didn't even stop to consider what I was doing. I installed a camera in the bathroom, hidden in a way that Max wouldn't notice. I recorded him naked. I still can't believe I did it, but I did. And then I showed the video to my friends. Some of them even wanted me to send it to them, so I did. Back then, it felt like it was just one big joke. I didn't think much of it, like once they saw it, they'd finally shut up and move on. And they did. After that, the topic was dropped, and I thought that was the end of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I decided to talk to Max. I'd been so influenced by my friends' constant talk about cheating and open relationships that I actually started to believe it was something I wanted too. I thought, maybe if I brought it up to Max, he'd agree, and we could open up our marriage. I knew deep down it wasn't something he'd ever go for. He's always been strictly monogamous, but I convinced myself that if I manipulated the situation right, I could get him to cave. I thought maybe I could guilt trip him, maybe make him feel like he wasn't doing enough, and that would be enough to change his mind. So I sat Max down, and we had a long conversation. I told him how unhappy I was, how I felt trapped, and how I thought opening up our marriage be a good solution. I didn't even realize how ridiculous I sounded. I was so focused on getting what I wanted that I didn't care how much it hurt him. Max, of course, was completely against it. He didn't want anything to do with an open marriage, and he made that clear from the start. He kept saying no, kept refusing, but I wasn't having it. I kept pushing him, telling him to think about it, trying to plant the idea in his head. But Max never wavered. He stayed firm, saying he wasn't going to do that. That's when I snapped. I was so angry, so frustrated that he wouldn't agree, that I said the cruelest thing I could think of. I blurted out that my friends had all seen him naked, and that they thought he was tiny. I told him that he couldn't satisfy me, and that's why I needed other people. I don't even know where those words came from, but they came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Max was stunned. I could see the shock and hurt in his eyes immediately. He asked me if I was serious, and in my anger, I doubled down. I said yes. I didn't explain, didn't elaborate. I just let it sit there, the most hurtful thing I'd ever said to him, hanging between us. He didn't say anything after that. He just went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. It's been 3 days now. He hasn't come back. He won't answer my calls or texts. I've been trying to get him to talk to me to explain that I didn't mean what I said, but he won't respond. It's like I finally had a reality check, and I can't believe what I've done. I've crossed lines I can never uncross. I don't know how to fix this. I don't want Max to know about the camera. I can't let him find out that I recorded him and showed the video to my friends. If he finds out, I know it will be the end of us for good. So now I'm stuck. How do I deflect if he starts asking about what I meant when I said my friends saw him naked? How do I explain that without revealing what I did? I'm lost and I don't know what to do. How do I fix this? How do I get Max to talk to me again? And how do I make this right without him finding out the whole truth? Update. Hello, Reddit. I can't believe I'm even typing this out, but here I am. Everything has spiraled out of control, and I feel like I'm drowning in the mess that I've created. It's been a week since I made that post, and my husband still hasn't said a word to me. He hasn't come back home, and I don't know where he is. I've reached out to our mutual friends, but they're either clueless or they're deliberately keeping things from me. They keep asking what happened, why he left the house, and of course they're very curious about the whole situation. I don't even blame them. I don't want to tell them what happened yet because I know I'm going to get flamed for this. I can already imagine their reactions, everyone piling on, telling me how this is all my fault. I can't handle that right now. I feel vulnerable enough as it is without my friends throwing accusations at me and making me feel worse. It's like I'm already living in a nightmare, and I don't want to add fuel to the fire by bringing my friends into it. I've also reached out to his family, but they've been just as tight-lipped, those fuckers. They clearly know where he is, but they won't tell me. They've made it abundantly clear that they blame me for this whole mess. They're judging me, and it stings. I used to be so close to them, but now I feel like an outcast. They pretty much hate me already, and they aren't even hiding it. Every time my phone buzzes, my heart races, half hoping it's Max reaching out to me and half dreading who it might actually be. I've been getting slammed left and right on this post. It's gone viral in ways I didn't expect, and I've received so many comments and DMs that I haven't even been able to go through them all. I know I'm going to read every single one to see what people are saying, to understand how others perceive my actions, but it's so overwhelming. Plus, it's annoying that all everyone wants to talk about is how I've messed up and not how to fix it. Like, yes, Jesus, please, I know I messed up, duh, how do I fix it? Like, hello? I'm here because I want to know how to fix it. To address a couple of ridiculous questions I've seen floating around, I'm not trying to deflect or push the blame onto my friends. I know it's all my fault. Sure, they influenced me and were completely in the wrong for how they acted, but I'm not an idiot who can't think for herself. I made my choices, and I went along with whatever they said when I should have just said no and kicked those fuckers out of my life. That's on me. I have a huge part in this mess because I let their opinions drown out my own. So yes, I'm to blame here. I can't shift the blame onto anyone else. I'm not trying to minimize what I've done, nor am I trying to suggest that I'm the victim in all of this. I realize the gravity of my actions, and I can't pretend otherwise. I want to clarify something important. This isn't some fabricated story for attention or pity. I have way better things to do than come online and create a fake story. This is my reality, and it's painful to admit how far I've fallen. I don't want sympathy. I just need to figure out how to work out this mess, and hopefully find a way to reach out to Max. I miss him so much it hurts, and every day feels so painful without him. Update. Hello, Reddit. Well, I guess your prayers were answered. Lots of you fuckers kept saying, oh, I hope Max leaves her. And I hope that poor boy comes to his senses and doesn't forgive her because she doesn't deserve it. Well, congratulations. Your prayers were answered. He won't forgive me. Let me start from the beginning. Max finally came around to the house to pick up a few things, and we ended up having a very, very long conversation. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but the short version is that Max wants a divorce. The long version? He's pretty much done with my shit. We talked, and it was mostly me begging him to reconsider. I tried to convince him that I had changed, that I wanted to work on things, but he just kept saying it was too late. He reminded me that I had so many chances to work on our relationship, and now that he finally decided to walk away, I couldn't just swoop in and expect him to take me back. Then came the part where he asked me what I meant when I said my friend saw him naked. Of course I had expected that question. But still, I kind of panicked and told him I had just lied to hurt him. Honestly, I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He didn't seem very convinced. Thankfully, he dropped it, and I could tell that it still stung him. I'm sitting here just coming to the realization that Max is really gone, my sweet, kind Max, and no amount of begging or sweet-talking will fix this. But there's still this tiny part of me that feels like I have to try. I don't know what to do. My husband is divorcing me, and I've messed up everything. This is all my fault, and I'm still getting flamed by you guys and family for how I've treated him. And once our mutual friends find out, they will rip me apart too. Thanks a lot for nothing, Reddit. I probably won't even update this again because, to be honest, I don't see the point. I feel like I've already lost everything that mattered. Update. Hello, Reddit. So if you're just stumbling upon this for some reason, I guess you can check my page for my previous posts to understand what's been going on. I know I said I wouldn't update again, but I've been getting DMs asking for an update, and it seems like everyone wants to see how my life continues to spiral into chaos. Maybe my misery makes you all feel better about your own lives? I don't know, but I really need advice this time. Like, seriously, I really, really do. So when I mentioned that Max wasn't convinced when I lied about my friends seeing him naked, I was right. He wasn't convinced. Ever since that whole ordeal unfolded, I haven't talked to my friends. A huge part of me feels like they influenced my behavior, which spiraled everything out of control. And another part of me has just been panicking and wanting to avoid everyone altogether. I've been ignoring their messages, and guess what? Not one of them came by to check on me. I guess they were never really good friends in the first place. Then things took a turn for the worse. Max tracked down one of my so-called friends on social media and asked her about what I'd said. This stupid girl spilled everything. She told him about the conversation we had about the camera I installed in our bedroom. She even sent him the video. What's worse, she didn't even tell him that they had influenced and basically pushed me into doing it. No, she said that I was the one who suggested showing them. Can you believe this? This lying, backstabbing witch completely twisted the narrative. Max was furious. With physical evidence in hand, he stormed over to my house with his sister to confront me, and it was an absolute shit show. I was crying and begging him to listen, but he was having none of it. He wants to sue me. Yes, you heard that right. He literally wants to sue me. I'm completely fucked, literally and figuratively. I don't know what to do. What the hell do I do, guys? I need advice, especially from anyone with legal knowledge. Am I going to go to jail? Is there any chance I could avoid jail time? I really don't want to go to jail. I've been crying and calling Max, begging him to reconsider. I even had to come clean to my mom and siblings about everything that's been happening. They've been messaging Max, trying to convince him to talk to me, to reconsider his stance. I've told them I'd sign the divorce papers, that I won't ask for anything. I just don't want to go to jail. But Max isn't budging. I know his family is likely pushing him to follow through with this. So here I am, in the middle of this mess, feeling utterly helpless and desperate for any advice you guys can give me. What should I do next? How can I fix this? Update. Hey Reddit. So again, I don't even know why I bothered posting on here. I didn't get a lot of helpful advice. Most of you kept saying I deserved everything that's happening. But a few of you actually gave me some useful tips, so thanks for that, I guess. A lot of people mentioned that I'll probably be charged with voyeurism and that it's considered a sexual offense. Some of you even said I could go to jail, or maybe get community service, or a fine. So, at least it's not as bad as I initially thought. A few of you helped me realize that the maximum sentence for voyeurism is 2 years, which honestly isn't as terrible as I expected. But I'm still absolutely terrified because jail? That's my worst nightmare. I don't want to go to jail. I wouldn't fit in there, and I know I'd hate every single second of it. I mean, who the hell would want to go to jail? So, I really want to try to come to some sort of settlement with Max. That's my main focus right now. Oh, and on top of all that, I finally got served. Yep, the divorce papers finally came. I knew it was coming, so it wasn't a shock, but it still hit me hard. There's nothing left to salvage in this marriage anymore, and that realization crushed me. I cried, like a lot. I think it's really starting to sink in that I'm the one who ruined everything. I messed up my marriage with my own hands, and there's no undoing it now. Third, Max kicked me out of the house. Yeah, that happened. The house was his, technically, and even though he'd left for a bit, I guess his awful family reminded him that it didn't make sense for him to leave me there. So he came back, gave me a few days to pack my stuff, and now I'm out. I'm currently staying at my parents' house, and it's not great. My parents are disgusted by everything that's happened. They're blaming me for it all, which isn't surprising, but it still hurts. They can't even look at me the same anymore. So now I'm stuck in this miserable situation, trying to figure out how to keep going. I'm completely broke. I've lost almost everyone. Our mutual friends? Yeah, they've all sided with Max. Nobody's reaching out to check on me, not a single one. I'm literally all alone and I'm terrified. I don't know how to fix any of this, and I don't know how to move forward. It feels like I'm drowning and there's no one left to pull me up. I don't know what to do. Update. Hey Reddit, it's been a long fucking while, I know. If you're just stumbling on this, you might want to check my previous posts to actually get what's going on. Now moving on, like I said, it's been a while. I saw my post featured on Best of Redditor updates recently, and it was marked as inconclusive because I hadn't updated in over a year. Honestly, I've been putting off updating for a long time. Months, actually. I just didn't feel ready. But when I saw my post on TikTok with the usual shitty Minecraft background, I figured, fine, I might as well update. So here's the short answer. I hadn't updated because I was in jail. Yeah. The long story is, first off, the divorce was finalized. It was cut and dry, barely an hour in court. There was no debt, no money to split. All of Max's properties were his alone, and I had no claim to any of them. Plus, we'd only been married for 3 years, so I didn't even qualify for spousal support. No kids either. So, in the end, it was quick. But I'll be real, it still sucked. Really bad. After the divorce, though, things got worse, like way worse. I got charged with voyeurism. The charge was for installing a camera with the intention of recording someone in a private act without their permission. Honestly, I don't even think I should have been charged with voyeurism, but I didn't get a lawyer. I couldn't afford one, so I didn't fight it. I didn't get the right to a jury trial. It was just a summary conviction in the magistrate's court. I didn't have the energy or resources to really do anything about it. And guess what? I ended up getting a year in prison. Let me tell you, jail was absolute hell. From the moment I got there, it was like people decided they hated me. I have no clue why. Maybe because they're just terrible people. But I was bullied nonstop for that whole year. I'm still not okay. I still have moments where I struggle with what happened in there. I'm out now, but it's hard. I'm staying with my parents, and I still don't have a job. It's been so long that I feel totally out of touch with everything. I'm jumpy, anxious, and honestly, I'm just a mess. I know I need help, so I've started therapy, and I'm really hoping it will help me get my life back together. It's the only thing I feel like I can control right now, working on myself. My fake-ass friends didn't even bother to check up on me while I was in jail. Like, seriously? Not one of them reached out. I was in there for a whole year, and you'd think someone would have the decency to at least come pay a visit. But nope, nothing. I mean, come on. They must have heard about everything that happened, right? Not even the bitch who had the audacity to blab to Max about how I recorded him, and even sent them the video. Did she bother to see how I was doing after everything fell apart? Or maybe even check up on me and tell me about how she told Max everything. Not even a, hey, hope you're okay, or what the hell happened. Or maybe even a visit while I was in jail. Just radio silence. Honestly, it's so frustrating to realize that I was just a source of entertainment for them. And now that I'm out, they've all moved on with their lives while I'm still picking up the pieces of mine. I feel so betrayed and angry. I thought we had a bond. But it looks like I was the only one who cared. What kind of friends abandon you when you need them the most? I know I messed up and I'm paying for it, but the least they could have done was check in. As for Max, because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering what's up with him, he's doing fine. Better than fine, actually. He's in a relationship now, and they've been together for a while. From what I've heard, they seem happy. So yeah, at least one of us came out of this better off. As for me, I'm still trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. It's hard when everything feels like it's falling apart, but I guess all I can do is try to move forward. Maybe someday I'll be happy again too. So, that's it, thanks I guess.
Hello Reddit, my name is Anna, and I'm 32 years old. I'm a housewife and a mother of 2 kids. I live with my husband in our own house, but the mortgage payment takes most of what we have, and we barely survive on the rest. I need your advice, which is the reason why I'm here. My husband has been acting weird ever since the dinner party his boss hosted, and he took me along. Well, I kind of made a mistake during the party. Ever since, David has been acting weird and refusing to talk to me. I never got married to David out of love at first, but I did grow to love him, and I had always known that David loved me more than I loved him. David had always been in love with me from the beginning. We had grown as childhood friends and later as best friends, and I had always known about David's feelings for me, but I kept ignoring them because I hadn't wanted to be with him. To me, back then, David had been that guy in the background, never really in the main picture. He was the one I ran to when I had problems, whether in previous relationships or with life generally. He'd comfort me and help me get through rough patches. Once I was back on my feet, he was just a childhood friend to me again. We grew up as next-door neighbors because our mothers had been best friends since high school and coincidentally married 2 men who had no issues with their friendship. They built their houses side by side with the same design and decorations. In fact, they even set up a farming business together, which was quite successful. I never knew our parents to have any misunderstandings because of how tight their bond was, and we, David and I, were born into that, so we just fell into the path they already laid. But while David was laid back, calm and gentle, always sticking to his carefully organized plans. I was the opposite. I was mischievous, always getting into trouble, and very spontaneous. We were more like opposites, and growing up I had always found David quite boring, so I did many things to get him in trouble so he could have fun, as I like to describe it. David had always been the studious type, so it wasn't a surprise when, after high school, he got a scholarship to study whatever course he decided. Meanwhile, I had to work extremely hard to even manage a place at the same university. David and I decided to share a house during our time in school, and I agreed. Despite our parents doing business together, David's dad had other businesses, which were also quite productive, so his parents were richer than mine, even though they never showed it off, which was what I loved about them most. In school, David continued his bookworm attitude and usually had one of the best grades in his department, but I was the party animal. There was no party I didn't attend, both the ones I was invited to and the ones I wasn't. I was the life of the party and grew really popular because of it. Although I never really hosted my own party, I did one time because David wasn't around. He had gone on a trip to see his parents, so I hadn't expected him back that day. David came back to find the house full of people, and he was so upset. I'd never really seen David angry in my life because he was never easily provoked, but he was so angry that day. He ordered everyone out of the house and warned me never to bring my parties into our house as long as we shared it. I apologized the next day, but David had already gotten over it. After that, I never hosted a party at our place again. My grades were really bad for the first 2 years of school, and I knew that if I wasn't careful, I would eventually end up retaking some courses. So I asked David to help me with my courses, and he did. It was actually because of David that I was able to graduate. I got my first boyfriend in my final year. Jack was David's friend, and he was the one always trying to get David to chill. When he came to our apartment one day with David, we clicked immediately. We started hanging out even without David, and eventually we started dating. We were together for 3 months before I found out that Jack had gotten a girl pregnant and was ignoring her. When I confronted him about it, he lied that the baby wasn't his. I broke things off with him, and because of how he acted, David stopped hanging out with him too. It wasn't long before I started dating another guy, Steven. Steven was a newbie in school, but he was my age. According to him, he had to stay back home because of his family's financial situation. Steven was very cool, and what I liked about him, or should I say what attracted me to him, was the fact that he was really handsome and had that bad boy vibe that every girl loves her guy to have. Despite being a newbie, he easily became popular among the girls, and the fact that he was with me made me the envy of most girls. But there was one problem with Steven. Steven was always collecting money from me, and at first I did not mind. David warned me against him, but I never had listened to David for once anyways. I kept spending all my money on Steven, but eventually I got to find out that he was also a serial cheat. He had been sleeping around, and when I asked him, he had told me he wanted to just explore, nothing more. I ended things with him and focused on my studies, and eventually I was able to graduate fine. I got a job 3 months after searching for one in a publishing company as an assistant editor. It was really stressful for me, having to read through various manuscripts and also edit them, but I still loved my job, except that my superior just liked giving me a hard time. He enjoyed seeing me slaving and taking all the glory, but I couldn't say anything. But eventually I just had to quit the job because of how frustrated I was. David helped me get another job in a company near his place, so I eventually moved in with him so I could save the money for transportation. Working there had been the worst experience because I got taken advantage of. I had wanted to prove to everyone that I could do well, including David, so I worked the hardest. And then my manager was always calling me into his office and praising me for jobs well done. He never praised me in front of others, though, and he said that was because he didn't want people thinking that it was nepotism, and I accepted it, thinking it was normal. The manager's name is Jim. Jim and I started dating a month after I started working there. We only met in secret, and we never had dates like other couples did because we mostly met when it was dark and at some random hotel of his choosing. But I liked Jim a lot. I was really in love with him, and I wanted more. But because of the rules of no dating colleagues at work, we had to keep our relationship to ourselves. I thought Jim loved me too. I mean, he did always tell me whenever we made love. He would tell me how much I meant to him and how he wanted me really badly. Well, he didn't exactly use the L word, but I felt like he did love me, so I hadn't minded he never told me he loved me. I kept our relationship a secret even from David. Whenever he asked why I was always late, I would just make excuses about my demanding job and leave it at that. I had an idea I had worked so hard on, and it had been almost perfect. I even asked David to help me with some designs because he was an architect, and he had gladly helped me with them because he had seen my pitch and had been proud of the idea I developed. So I told Jim about the idea I was working on, and he had been happy for me, or I thought he had, and he had asked to see the document before anyone else so he could help me scan for mistakes, and I had gladly given him, thinking he was doing it because he loved me. Well, the day finally came. Normally in the company, it's only the managers of each team that are allowed to pitch for any new project they want to work on. But there was always one day in 3 months where even the least of workers were allowed to present their ideas to the company. And if the idea had been good, the worker gets automatic promotion and also allowed to have a team to work with on the idea. I had been so excited when that day came, and I hadn't even slept through the night trying to perfect my speech. And David had borne the brunt of that because he had been my audience through the night. So when the time finally came, I had been shocked when Jim had presented my idea in the exact way, without even removing any part or changing it. I remember vividly that I had run out of the meeting without properly excusing myself, and I had gone into the bathroom and cried my eyes out. I was so upset that I hadn't even stayed until the end of the day before leaving. When David had seen me and had asked, I had just lied that I was feeling sick, and he had asked if I had been able to pitch, but I had just told him I had been too sick to do so I had handed it over to my manager. What could I have said? I couldn't exactly tell him that I was actually seeing Jim, and I had foolishly handed him my proposal to look through, only for him to use it. The next day was the weekend, thankfully, so I did not have to go to work. So I laid in bed, mopping my tears and licking my wounds. David had had work, so he had regretfully left me alone, which I was thankful for. But he had cooked and bought me some medications before leaving. My phone kept ringing, and they were all from Jim. I did not pick any of his calls, and he texted too, telling me how sorry he was and that he wanted to explain in person why he did what he did. I decided to go meet him to hear him out. Perhaps he had some really unselfish reasons for doing what he did. So I had gone, and Jim had gotten on his knees and begged me for forgiveness and had promised never to do such again. He had told me it was because he had wanted a promotion for so long after years of being a manager, and my proposal had been so good he had gotten greedy. He also promised that he would definitely help me get promoted after he was officially promoted. I believed him. In fact, at that point, I was happy he would get the promotion he had craved for years, and it would all be because of me. I forgave him, and we went back to our usual. Jim and I were together for 2 years before it was suddenly announced that Jim was getting married to our boss's daughter. To say I was shocked was an understatement. I couldn't believe my ears. He was getting married, but not to me, but to our boss's daughter. I was so pained and angry that I stopped taking his calls, but he kept pleading for a chance to explain himself, and eventually I met up with him. He then told me that it was actually the boss who brought the proposition up and that he couldn't have said no to our boss. He went ahead to convince me it was me he actually truly wanted and that he could never love her. I stupidly believed him, and we continued seeing each other. And within a month of the announcement, Jim got married to her. But that did not stop our secret meetups from taking place. So I was literally having an affair with a married man. But at that point, I didn't mind. I was so in love with Jim, I did not care what anybody thought or that it was morally wrong. David found out eventually that I was seeing a married man, and he had told me to end things with him, but I hadn't listened. Well, until I got pregnant for Jim. Jim had flipped when I told him I was pregnant. He had said that he couldn't have a baby with me just yet, especially because his marriage was still new and all. He gave all sorts of excuses and had offered me money to abort the baby. It had been then my eyes cleared, and I started to see Jim for who he really had been all along, a liar, cheat, and manipulator. I left his hotel room and cried all the way home, and when I'd gotten home, David had been there waiting for me because of how late into the night it was. As soon as I saw David, I just burst out in tears again, and David had rushed to comfort me. After several minutes of just sitting in David's arms and sobbing while he soothed me, I had leaned over, caught his face in my hands, and kissed him. David had been surprised and taken aback and tried to avoid it, but I had not been ready to listen to anything, and I begged him to take me to bed. David eventually agreed. I knew he wanted me as he had always done over the years, so it had been easy to persuade him I wanted to have sex, not only for emotional comfort. Weeks after the sex with David, I was still behaving weirdly to him because I did not know what to make of our relationship, and I hadn't wanted to give him hope of things developing between us. That day, I had decided to clean my room since it was the weekend, So I had done the cleaning up and was resting when David rushed into my room holding something that was quite dirty. It was obvious he picked it from the trash can, and I had looked at him, disgusted. He hadn't minded the look I gave him and instead had tears in his eyes and had asked me if it was true. I looked at him, confused, and when I leaned closely to look at what was in his hands, it turned out to be the pregnancy test kit I bought, and I had tested positive. It was obvious from the look in David's eyes that he thought the baby was his because of the sex we had a few weeks ago. I knew I was making a very big mistake, but I thought immediately, right there staring into David's expectant eyes, that David would be a good father for my child, and I did not even have to raise it as a single mother as I had planned to. So I nodded and told him I was really pregnant, expecting him to ask the next obvious question if it was his, but David hadn't done that. Instead, he had gotten down on his knees after making happy sounds and pounding the air with his fist, and had proposed marriage to me without a ring. I had been surprised because I had certainly not expected that from him, but I had said yes, and later that day David had taken me out with him to purchase a ring, and we had called our parents to announce that we were getting married. They had been really excited because it meant their lifelong dream was coming to pass. Everything had progressed quickly, and within a month, we were married. When Jim heard I was getting married, he had called and left me different messages, but I hadn't replied to any of them, and I eventually blocked him. I knew he had only wanted to confirm if I had aborted the baby, and I hadn't wanted to deal with him at that point. David had always been a good friend right from diapers, but he was better as a husband. He was really sweet, paid attention to me, and he never missed the doctor's appointments to check if the babies were all right. Yes, I had twins. We agreed that since I was carrying 2 babies, working was not an option, so I quit my job and started staying at home. Our apartment then was big, but definitely not big enough for 2 babies, so we had to get a new and bigger apartment. David had used up all his savings and also took out a mortgage so he could buy a house with the hopes that within a year and a half, he'd be done with the payment. I gave birth to my babies, Sam and Sarah, and because I almost developed a complication while in labor, I had to be operated on to save my life and that of the babies. David had gotten another loan to pay for the medical bills and everything so we could go home. All the sacrifices he made me fall in love with him before I even realized it myself. He was an unselfish person and lover, and the way he adored our kids was just everything. He never even doubted the paternity of the kids, even though if it were according to calculations, I should have given birth 2 months later. But David did not even mind all that, and he loved the kids and me greatly. David had to sell the land his father had given him as a gift, so he could pay back the money he got to clear off our medical bills. So it was only the mortgage we were to pay back, except things did not happen exactly how we planned because David's company had a major financial setback, and they had to sell the company to another firm, and more than half of the staff were asked to go. David was not let go, though, but their pay was slashed into halves, and that meant paying back the loan on the house also took more than half of the money he earned. I couldn't work because of the twins. David had also insisted I didn't so we could put an eye on them, especially at that crucial point of raising them. And then, instead of the year and a half calculated for the mortgage payment, it became 3 years. It was not easy for us, and I started to get really frustrated with everything happening. I advised David several times to quit the job and find something else, but he had refused because he thought that there were really no better jobs anywhere too. David never complained about his new boss, but from how I saw things, the boss was always insulting and degrading his workers, especially David, and it made me really agitated. I hated the way David would scurry out of the house whenever his boss called to come get him when he was too drunk to drive himself home, or how the boss would win Best Architect of the Year while it was David doing all the work. I felt insulted on David's behalf, especially because I knew he was still there because he did not want us starving. And one time I had suggested going to our parents for the money, and David had flipped. He did not want our parents involved in our financial problems, and he'd rather receive more insults and work to get the money than do that. It pissed me off, and we would fight several times over it. Each time, David would apologize, but still remained firm in his decision. Eventually, I decided to go meet Jim to pay off the mortgage. I thought to threaten him with his kids. Luckily, I had not deleted his contacts. I only blocked him, so I unblocked him, and I had texted him for us to meet up. Jim had agreed almost immediately to meet up. He probably thought I missed us and wanted to rekindle old flames. We met in secret as we usually did before. He booked a hotel room and texted me the address, and I had gone to meet up with him. Luckily, the kids were with their grandparents for the weekend, and David had gone on an errand out of town for his boss, so I had the chance to sneak away without being caught. On getting there, I had immediately told Jim the reason I was there. He had been shocked at first that I kept the babies and that I had married another man, knowing fully well that the babies weren't his. Then he agreed to give me the money to pay off the mortgage and even more to take care of the kids under the condition that the kids would never know he was their father, and I was cool with that, so I agreed. But Jim started to talk about how much he missed me and how miserable he was in his marriage, and that he was glad I was the mother of his kids. I was happy he felt miserable in his marriage because it somehow made me satisfied that he did not cheat me and get away with it totally. Jim kept going on and on about missing me and how everything had been without me in his life, and I had fallen for it. We ended up having sex that evening before I left his hotel room. I regretted cheating on David, and I felt really guilty. And I decided that once Jim sent the money for the mortgage payment, I would never speak to him again. But Jim did not send the money. I waited for days but did not receive the money, so I had to call and ask to meet again. He agreed eagerly, and when I confronted him about the money, he had told me he had purposely not sent it because he knew that if he had, I would never have wanted to see him again. He made me promise to always meet up with him whenever he wanted if I wanted the money, and I was so desperate at that point that I agreed to his terms. He gave me the money, and instead of doing what I had planned to do with the money in the first place, I did not. For the first time in my life, that much money was sitting pretty in my account, and I thought of all the beautiful things I could buy with it. And besides, how would I explain to David where the money came from? So I decided to keep the money selfishly for myself. And the money kept increasing because any time I met with Jim, he gave me money. I felt cheap and used because it felt like he was paying me for the sex, but I had no choice but to continue with it. David was mostly too exhausted from running silly errands for his boss to notice my suspicious movements, and it relieved me that he didn't. But he did notice my change of wardrobe. I was starting to buy glamorous dresses that I could originally not afford before, and I changed the kids' wardrobe too. When David had asked where I got money from to get it, I had lied that a distant cousin had sent them for us and the kids, and he had asked who the distant cousin was since we practically grew up together, and he had seen no one like that before. I had lied that we had just reconnected and that my parents probably would not even remember her, and David had kept quiet about it. David's 32nd birthday came, and I bought him a cake, made dinner, and also bought him 2 suits to replace the almost shabby ones he wore to work. David had refused the gifts because he kept pestering me to tell him where I got the money to get the expensive suits. I got really angry and did not speak to him for days. He later apologized for not accepting the gift, but he was still stubborn about accepting the suits. One time, one of the twins, Sarah, got really sick and needed a blood transfusion, and I began to panic. I offered to be the donor, but I had a history of low sugar levels, so I was not allowed to. David had offered to, and I knew that my whole secret was about to be exposed, so I had refused blatantly, giving different stupid excuses for it. Eventually, they had been able to get a donor for Sarah, and that settled it, and I had been really glad it got sorted out that way. I continued my affair with Jim, and he continued to pay me for the sex. David was still working for that annoying company and slaving around, which pissed me off. So eventually the boss had won another award again, despite the fact that it was David's designs and work that actually won. But as usual, the boss took the credit for it all, and David had kept quiet about it. Anyway, the boss decided to host a party to celebrate the award he won, and all the workers had been allowed to bring a guest with them. David was the one who did most of the work planning the party on short notice. He had asked me to go to the party with him, and I had accepted because I hadn't wanted him to go alone, looking like a loser again. But I had forced him to wear one of the suits I got him for his birthday. I had bought a killer dress so I could show them who was boss at the party. I hated the way they degraded David, and I wanted to show them that his wife was not someone they could look down on too. Prior to the day of the party, we had dropped off the twins at their grandparents' place, so we did not have to bother about who was babysitting them when it was time for the party. David had had to go alone to the party because he had been called that there had been a problem with delivering the food, which meant I had to meet him at the party instead of leaving together as planned. When I got to the party, I first saw David serving some guest drinks, and I had been infuriated by the sight of it. I had purposely walked towards him and removed the drinks from his hand, and had asked him sweetly if he was going to enjoy the party and not be a workaholic for once. The people at the table had been shocked, and I had been happy, but David had frowned, and I had just smiled sweetly and greeted the people at the table and introduced myself as David's wife. One of them, who was unusually loud and arrogant, had asked me to join them at the table, and with the way David tensed beside me, I had guessed it was the boss that was always ordering him around. I accepted the offer and sat, therefore forcing David to sit too. David was rather tense throughout while his boss and the others at the table laughed at stupid jokes, and he even made jokes about David. I was angry and just stared at them with pure hatred. Well, just until two more people joined the table, and David's boss had gotten up to greet the person warmly. When I looked up, I had been very shocked to discover it was actually Jim and his wife who joined the table. It had been my turn to become tense. David's boss then asked David to pour Jim a drink, and I had never felt so embarrassed in my life, especially because Jim kept looking at me stylishly, and he was grinning. He had been enjoying the moment. I had been so upset and bothered, and I later excused myself to use the restroom. Jim's wife had come in moments later after me, and I had become tense again, trying to avoid her when she had smiled at me sweetly. She had introduced herself as Kara. I'd only ever known her as Jim's wife. I never really found out about her name or anything about her in particular. We discussed a few general things right there, and she seemed like a really good person. Not at all like the monster Jim had painted her to be. And I started to feel guilty for believing a conniving bastard like Jim and helping him cheat on such a lovely person like Kara. Curiously, I had asked Kara how she and Jim had met, and she had told me that Jim was actually the one who pursued her without giving her a chance to reject him, and that he had proposed marriage 2 months after dating. I'd been very shocked because that had not been the story Jim had told me. We eventually left the restroom and went back to the table, only to hear all the others teasing David for being a poor guy. And the most infuriating part was that Jim and David's boss did most of the teasing, while David just sat there and poured their drinks. I had been so upset and angry that I had not even known I shouted angrily at David to stop being pathetic and get his money up. Everyone looked startled and stared at me like I had grown 2 heads, even Kara. David had just looked at me, stood up, and left without a word, and I went with him. I've tried to explain several times why I blurted that out in anger, but David is not even listening to me. He hardly stays at home now, so there's barely any chance to have any conversations with him. Please, guys, what do I do? I cannot lose David. I really do love him. Please. Update. Hello, Reddit. These past couple of months have been dreadful for me. I've cried so hard that I've started to feel like there's no more tears left in my tear ducts. But every time my brain decides to replay that particular day again, I just find fresh tears dropping from my eyes. David actually found out. He found out that the twins weren't his. Apparently, he had secretly done a DNA test after the way I reacted when I hadn't wanted him to be the blood donor for Sarah. He had walked into the house that day and had slapped the document hard on the table right beside me, and with red eyes, asked who the father of our kids was. I tried to deny the allegations, but David was having none of it, and he had shouted at me angrily. I had told him who it was. I had been so scared of the way he was looking at me that I had actually just gone on my knees and cried while blurting out everything. David had just kept quiet, listening to me, and when I started to plead for his forgiveness, he had just turned away and left the house. This time, he never came back. Our parents found out about everything, not because David told them, but because I did, so they could help me at least plead with David, but that was not the case. Now everyone's back is against me. I am all alone and I have no one by me. Jim is also ruined, by the way. I had texted Jim angrily and tried blaming him for everything, but his phone had apparently been with his wife, and now she is filing for a divorce and not leaving him a penny. The nasty things you guys have said regarding my post also made me realize more how stupid I've been. I kept blaming David's boss for the nasty way he treated him, and yet I did the same to him too. I hurt David even more than his boss ever did. David suffered through all those insults because of my kids and me, and yet all I did was stab him, not in the back this time, but right in the chest. My parents have taken the kids away from me, and they want no sort of contact from me at all. So even my kids are not mine anymore. I've sent numerous texts and called several times to apologize for what I did to David, but he just would not even hear me out. He quit his job at that company and moved away, and I don't even know where he's moved to. I really feel so stupid for all the hurt I caused David.